bring in our political panel. Adrienne Elrod is here. She's a Democratic strategist and former senior aide for the Biden-Harris campaign and a senior aide for the Clinton campaign, I might add. And Joe Watkins is also with us. He's a Republican strategist and former George H.W. Bush White House aide. All right, folks, there is a lot to get into, but let's start by talking about this, okay? I want to play a little roundup of what has been said by some Republicans about the Mar-a-Lago search. Take a listen to this, please.
They want to make him responsible for having taken classified documents and preserved them.
I still haven't seen any evidence that that Trump was even asked to give these documents back. Do any of us really believe that Donald Trump is reading his nuclear secrets on his bedside at night?
This is the first entering of a former president's home for potentially information, whatever they think's wrong, plus the way Hillary Clinton's negotiation and emails were handled.
What use could a former president have for classified or top secret information once he's left office?
Every former president has access to their documents. It's how they write their memoirs.
You know what I call that? Donald Trump's tactics are working. The only reason we are talking about this search is because this is the conversation that Donald Trump wants us to have. Adrienne, he made the search public. We're talking about his claims. I want to get off the hamster wheel.
Yeah, you're exactly right, Simone. This is what he wants us to be talking about. This is also what Republicans want to be talking about, which is why you saw that array of clips. The Republicans were out in full force this past weekend on the Sunday shows and in the show's proceeding. So this is part of Donald Trump's ability that, frankly, I'm going to give him a little bit of props for this. He does a very good job of confusing us, distorting us, throwing out terms like affidavits, search warrants, where all we do is get a little confused unless we're following every single nuance of the story. And then, it makes it seem like the government's overreaching by trying to, break into the home or get access to the home of a former president, which is, of course, not the case at all. But this is what Donald Trump wants us to do, because he doesn't want us to focus on the truth, which is the fact that he did have classified documents that he should not have had at his home after leaving the White House.
Absolutely. And I think it's also important to note that all of this is happening as we're in the middle of a very important election cycle. November is coming. And to me, it seems that some Democrats are really playing a dangerous game in some state primaries. They are not talking about Donald Trump, but they are talking about spending money, and they're actively spending very big money in at least 6 states, I do believe, to boost far-right Republican candidates that they think would lose in a general election. Axios has described this as how this could be coming back to bite them. So the House Select Committee investigating the January 6th Capitol riot is considering whether to condemn Democrats in Colorado and elsewhere for meddling in Republican primaries to boost 2020 election deniers. Election meddling. Joe, what do you think is going to come of this? And do you find it particularly interesting that the January 6th committee feels the need to weigh in here?
Yeah, well, it's an interesting thing. The January 6th committee obviously is concerned about what happens and with Democrats as well as Republicans. And they want to control the narrative. They don't want the work that they're doing, which is so important, to in any way be diminished or tarnished. And so I think they're wise to raise this point. You have to remember that in politics, all politics are local. And although it's sometimes easy to try to broad brush Republicans, they can be as different as day and night. I mean, you've got the governor of Florida, Ron DeSantis, who's a very, very different Republican from the Republican governor of Massachusetts, Charlie Baker. And so it's always dangerous to broad brush folks because all politics are local, and what matters is what the issues are that impact the voters in a specific district or state. So I think that the January 6th committee is doing the right thing. I think, pull Democrats who might think that they're helping themselves back from potentially making a big mistake and broad brushing all Republicans.
Joe, I think you just hit on something that is, I know, an internal conversation that Democratic strategists are currently having. And some people have likened this to celebrations when Donald Trump won the Republican nomination. There are a number of Democrats that thought that there was no way a reality TV star could beat Secretary Clinton. I would argue that the Clinton campaign ended up taking him very seriously. Adrian, you could speak to that. But this is very different. And I think that Trump got a lot of attention in 2016, but now we have Democrats spending money to promote election deniers. Adrian, will this hurt some of our friends' chances in the general election?
Well, here's the challenge, Simone, and I've got a lot of mixed feelings about this. You know, Sean Patrick Maloney was on Meet the Press this past weekend. He was asked about this by Chuck Todd and made it very clear, look, his job is to elect more Democrats. So I think the DCCC's posture, which has been the largest funder of some of these election deniers to try to get them to be the Republican nominee in the primaries going into the general, I think, you know, Maloney's biggest challenge here is he wants to make sure that the weakest candidate is on the ballot for the for the Democrat to run against. So oftentimes that is, in theory, the election denier, the one who's the far extreme MAGA January 6th election denier Republican. The problem with that, of course, is the fact that if for some reason, or if rather for a pretty decent reason, that Republican election denier wins, and part of the reason why they won in the general is because the DCCC boosted them, that is where Democrats can get in some real hot water. You know, Simone, you and I have been doing this for a long time. The Democratic Party oftentimes gets criticized for not playing hardball, for not playing, dirty enough, getting in the trenches and really fighting it out and using some of the, pages from the Republican playbook. So here's an example of Democrats kind of playing dirty and getting criticized for it. But this is a different deal. This is not exactly Claire McCaskill and Todd Akin. Of course, Claire McCaskill's campaign boosted Todd Akin, and he infamously, became the weakest general election nominee, and she beat him. This is not that, though. These are people that if they take over a state, if they take over a congressional district, if we have more of them in key offices in our country, our democracy could be ruined. We could be living under an authoritarian regime in the next few cycles. So it's a risky strategy. I've got mixed feelings, but I think ultimately we should not be propping up people who want to deny the democratic process and who are trying to subvert the will of the voters.
Look, I think that what you just said, Adrian, there are lots of Democratic strategists out there unwilling to say that part. I want to play something else Sean Patrick Maloney said on Meet the Press along these lines. Chuck Todd asked him about spending money in Michigan to back far-right congressional candidate John Gibbs over the incumbent Peter Meijer. And listen to what Sean Patrick Maloney says about Peter Meijer.
Let's remember, Peter Meijer was an anti-choice extremist who also was going to vote to have Jim Jordan run the Judiciary Committee, give you 2 years of nonsense investigating Hunter Biden or some other silliness.
Yes, Peter Meijer was going to vote with the Republicans. But I think the issue here is that Sean Patrick Maloney is labeling Peter Meijer as an extremist. There are actual QAnon types in the party. There are actual extremists within the Republican Party. But I do think we should have a conversation about whether it is helpful if my Democratic friends label everyone as an extremist just because they are a Republican. Joe, what are your thoughts?
I agree. I agree. I think you're very wise to say that, Simone, that, again, you can't broad brush everybody because Republicans are different. And then you have to remember as well, as we all know, that what may be hot this summer as an issue may not be hot in November, in the fall. And so what if the Democrat succeeds in getting what seems to be the weakest Republican to be the nominee, and then that Republican ends up knocking the ball out of the park on whatever the issue in the fall is that voters care about? That's always the challenge. So you can't broad brush. You've got to think ahead. You've got to suppose as well, what's going to matter to the people that vote on Election Day? Are they going to care about somebody's address, where they're from? This is what's happening in Pennsylvania in the Senate race, where the issue is being made about Dr. Oz's residence. Or are they going to believe what Rakim said in You Gotta Have Soul, which is, it ain't where you're from, it's where you're at. And so the candidate that's more where everybody is at on the issue is the one that has the better chance of winning. And so if the Republican is more aligned with the voters on the issue of safety, for instance, then that Republican has a chance to win. And so Democrats have to be careful about that. And I think you're wise, Simone, to raise the flag of caution.
Yeah, I think the reality is that has the Republican Party been taken over by extremists? Absolutely, yes. Is it extreme to say that children should be made to have, the 10-year-olds should be made to have the babies of their rapists? Absolutely. But is every single Republican an extremist? No. And I think nuance, as oftentimes nowadays, is being lost in our political conversation. We could do this all day. Adrian Elrod, Joe Watkins, thank you both. Appreciate your time.